Good day, my name is Ekanem. I'm the artist and innovator in residence at the Halifax Public Libraries. Oh, it's been a ride, but you're here because this is when you get to launch your podcast. We've talked about story, how story is great for communicating, talked about story structure, we've talked about story being the foundation of your podcast, and it doesn't matter what format your podcast is, always think in story. I was thinking beginning, middle, and end. Start people, introduce them to where it is happening, get them on this journey, and make sure there's a climax at the end with a resolution. We also talked about what a podcast is, basically audio, living online, and people can listen to. But I also want to encourage you to introduce video to your podcasting. You could use your phone, you could use a camera, because YouTube is getting heavy into podcasting now, and videos are one way you can connect more with your audience. Talked about the team that you might gather as you're growing your podcast. And of course, we talked about the gear. Talking about gear, you could do it with your phone using the Anchor app, but you can also come into the library. There's a studio fully equipped with gear and software that you can use to create your podcast. We talked about pilot, your first episode that will pull your audience in. We talked about a trailer. Essentially, this is what my podcast is about. Talking about publishing it, we've learned so much over the course of the last couple of videos. And you're right now at the point where you get to launch a podcast. But before you do, I just wanted to share 10 more lessons that you can take away when you're just thinking of podcasting in general. And I think things like start with a clear vision. What is your why? Why are you creating this podcast and who is this podcast for? Give yourself time, right? So if you said, okay, I want to launch it in 2 weeks, maybe add another week, take more time, spend more time working on your podcast, getting into where you want it to be. While I'm saying give yourself time, I think you should also give yourself deadlines. So if you say my podcast will be ready in 2 weeks, add one more week, but make sure you say on this date I'm going to launch and put it out in the public. Because if you don't put it out in public, then you won't have any fire burning under you. Create and form your Avengers. These are the people that you trust and you can reach out to for help, and you can reach out to help you create this podcast you want to. And you need to be a good manager, right? Even if you're just working with yourself and your phone, that means managing yourself. And if you're working with people, making sure everybody gets along and everybody knows why this podcast is being created. Lean into your strengths. So the things you feel you're strong in, lean into them. Or are you good at making people laugh? Maybe have a comedy podcast. Are you good at talking about films? Maybe have a review podcast. Give value. So when people are giving you their time, they're expecting some kind of value. So when you're creating your podcast, think, what value am I giving to my listener? And listen. So one thing I always advise is kind of have a place where people can send you notes. So whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on email. Speaking of email, of course, you can email me at israel@lessonswiththeking.com. But when you get the feedback, listen and take it in. Also, there is no perfect. Basically, if you want the perfect podcast, that's not going to happen. You just have to create it and understand that as you are working, you are getting better. And finally, never stop learning. All right. So we've just spent some time and it's been wonderful. And you are right at the cusp of launching your podcast. But don't feel like, okay, now I've launched my podcast, I know everything there is to know. No, you have to keep learning. And stealing the concept of story and bringing it back full circle. When we started this, I shared the Maya Angelou quote. Each of us has at least one story. And I'm now ending with that quote. Each of us has at least one story. I do believe we have more than one. So don't hesitate to tell your story. Understand that podcasting is a great way to tell your story. For your final assignment, Write more ideas for podcasts and pick one of those ideas and write 2 episodes. Now you've already created a podcast and it's time to go and launch that podcast. So, yeah, go ahead, click publish on the episode you've created, and then start creating more episodes. Thank you so much for spending time with me. It's been a wonderful series. And of course, you can always check on the website, the Halifax Public Library website, to find out where you can come in, have my office hours there. But also, you can email me at israel@lessonsoftheking. I always reply my email. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I've had a fun time, and I hope you learned something.